Yeah, it doesn't matter what I do. They have lived in Wisconsin. We got it. Because we got to exit house and then we full cars.
Oh, really? My grandparents live in Knoxville. They don't have any snowplows. When it snows, even the whole city shuts down.
And you can get those.
Oh, really? Yep.
But there, you could see a gap.
The beats purpose using a plow.
Yeah, the foot maybe would help, but if you got 3 inches, you're not going to touch it.
Yeah. It's like I got one of my cousins lives in outside Austin. And they got snow last week. She posted a video, which is flurries, and she was sitting like bumper to bumper traffic.
Right on. And then the funny thing is, that seems those are by the evening.
Yeah.
I was like,
That's how it goes. It's there for about half the day. My parents moved to Phoenix down back in March. Get away from the snow and wrap. My dad posted a picture at 75 and sunny. Nice. But he also posted in July that it was 119 degrees.
Yeah, I'd be one of those people who travel.
Snowbird, I can totally get on board with that.
I don't like. No. This is your. I guess it's dry out there. But brother-in-law, his wife's
It's humid. Yeah, we went down there over Memorial Day. We got up to about 105. But it felt 105 down there is about 85 here.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing is, though, the vehicles sit out in the sun, and you go inside the vehicle, and it's like stepping inside an oven. You turn the vehicle on, all of a sudden the air's blowing at you. It's like a fan blowing in the oven. It's just, I don't understand. More power to them, but we went to a lake, the parking lot's a blacktop parking lot, and stepping from the blacktop to the off the blacktop was like a 20-degree difference. Unbelievable. Exactly. Words legal. We took out so much words legal.
Yeah. I don't know.
Go back here. You have to run through this, and then they'll approve the minutes. And then go and ask for the second one. Once we go up one time, let's take it all night. I went to 109. Doing a job over in Madison, and for the student, and we had to go in front of their urban design commission in Madison. It's the worst city in the state to do anything, building, signs, anything fun. And I remember I was sitting there, and there was a person who went up there who was pitching an idea to put Chapel message board for a theater. That makes sense, right? And he It was nice, about the spiel about it. And mentioned something about a theater in Milwaukee, but it's the same thing. And the main guy stops him and tries to pull it off. We're not in Milwaukee, we're mad at something. And they shot it down. Like, God, so then I got up there and I got most of my stuff passed, but they butchered it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I told the team there, why couldn't you move your facility a mile to the east and Cottage Grove?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Town of Waukesha Plan Commission meeting on December 14th, 2017, beginning at 6:30. I'd like to call the meeting to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, could you call the roll?
Supervisor Fisher?
Here.
Commissioner Stigler?
Here.
Commissioner Miller is absent. Chairman Merrick?
Present.
Commissioner Flanagan?
Here.
And then Commissioner Ramirez and Commissioner White are absent.
Thank you. And Madam Clerk, have we met the opens meeting law?
Yes, we have.
And we can move on to 5, discussion and possible action on the accessory structure and waiver modification. Petitioner is Russ Gerke. Location is South 47 West 22115 Lonsdale Road. Tax key is WAKT 139-399-003. This is for a recommendation to the town board, and we can have the Milwaukee report.
Mr. Chairman, could I just interrupt just for a point of personal privilege for a minute? Can we confirm we do have a quorum tonight, or do we indeed? I know we have 3 absent. Is it correct? 3 absent members, so there are 4 of us present. Just to clear that up, so indeed we do have a quorum of Plan Commission members present. I see Attorney Macy shaking his head. That's no question about that. We're good to go. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Fisher. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The petition in front of us tonight is accessory building with a waiver and modification for location. The petitioner was in front of the Plan Commission and Board last month. The request was denied at the time. The reason for the denial was the materials in the building were seen as incompatible with the residential district that the property happens to be in due to the vertical metal siding in the building. The petitioner has modified the building to contain fiber cement board horizontal lap siding, which will closely match the color of the residence at this time. The petitioner has provided colored photos of the house, in addition to a sample of the material for the accessory building. As you can see, it's a little tough to see there on the image, but there's a picture of the house. It's got a tan siding on it and a brick near the bottom. Here's a picture of the house siding, and that is a sample of the color of the horizontal lap siding that will be on the new accessory building. In terms of the accessory building itself, there's a black and white photo of it. You can see there's a brick base course in the bottom, which will match the house brick, and then the horizontal lap siding as well. So this was denied at the last meeting for the material incompatibility. The other discussion that was part of this was the waiver modification for location of the actual building. And our ordinance states that the accessory building shall not project closer to the base setback line from the primary street than the principal building. And in this case, it was presented, I presented it as, here's the home, here's the proposed accessory building. Even though the accessory building meets the setback, it's 300 plus feet from the road, it projected closer to the base setback line than the residence. And it was pointed out to me actually just before the meeting that the actual base setback line of the property is angled and curved. So if you were to offset that particular line, according to the house and this, it would basically follow this. And based on the measurements that I took quickly before the meeting, the proposed accessory building, even though it appears to be closer to the base setback line in the house, it actually mirrors the curvature of the road and the base setback line. So I believe that it complies with that provision in the ordinance and does not project any closer to the base setback line than the principal residence. So in my opinion, what we're looking at here is the compatibility of the materials and whether the Plan Commission feels the new materials are compatible with the existing residence. So if the Plan Commission should choose to approve it, I have prepared a list of conditions outlined in the staff report, 1 through 9. You can ignore, if you also agree with the fact that, or my opinion that the accessory building does not project close to the base setback line, then condition 1 would no longer be valid.
Thank you. Just from my very, very rough and crude looking at this planner malarkey, it looks like the building is actually closer.
It appears that way, but if you take a measure, if you actually measure, and we did this with the petitioner right before the meeting, if you take a measurement and you basically hold a piece of paper up and mark where the base setback line is and measure to the house, and then move that basic piece of paper along the base setback line, when you get to the location of the accessory building, it actually appears to be behind it.
That's exactly what I did. So if we look at that there.
Mm-hmm.
Can I approach and see how you're calculating it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
So all I did was from the base setback to the edge of the new building, I just took a mark on the paper, very crude, I know, but it's probably one of the most accurate ways to do it.
Right.
And then if we pull that along, and we're still at the base setback of the at the roadway,
Except
we're in back of the building.
there is another ordinance that says that when you do from the setback, it's perpendicular at a right angle. So if you need to, if you
Okay.
take the corner of the page and you keep it at a right angle, then it comes out differently.
So at a right angle to the road.
At a right angle to either, what I was using was the center of the road, but it doesn't matter which one you use, if
Sure.
it's the edge of the road or the center of the road. Because I'll show you the way I did it, because I see the way you did it.
Let's do this
Well,
because that'll
Mr.
be.
Chairman,
Yes.
we can't have a side meeting. If you want to adjourn and take care of this, but this is, we've got to come back and find out if this really is an issue for the board or not.
Okay.
They
Thank
might
you.
want to waive it and it won't be an issue. If it's an issue, we're going to have to get to the bottom of it. I thought if it was going to be a 2-second thing, we could do it, but obviously council has the right to explain it. So maybe we should just turn over to council and maybe she can point out to the board that using the picture or something, how they calculated it or figured it. I don't know if that's possible or not. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Susan Sorrentino. I'm an attorney and I represent Russ and Melissa Gerke, who live in this home and would like to put an accessory building for storage and for vehicles and equipment. The statute states that it's measured from the setback, and setbacks are measured from the center of the road. And I don't think there's any dispute about that. The only calculation that we're trying to look at is because of the curve of the road, that means the setback comes up at the same angle that the road does. And because the road curves up so much, so the setback comes up the equal amount as the road turns. And because the building that we're proposing may be further north than the house. It's not any closer to the setback than the house itself is, because the setback keeps going to the north as you go to the east as the road curves. So I would submit that I think our proposed location already does comply with the ordinance and that a variance isn't needed. If you come to the conclusion that in fact it does not comply, then we would ask that you would approve our waiver modification on a couple of other purposes. One, as you can see, it's more than 350 feet from the road. I believe that the purpose and the spirit of the ordinance was you didn't want to have a number of buildings up close to the road, possibly obstructing the home. This is already quite a distance off the road. In addition, there are two lines of trees. At the road, there's a line of trees of arborvitae, and then the dark area that you see just before you get to the home is a whole nother set of line of trees. And neither the home nor the proposed accessory building is visible from the road anyway. Third, the topography of the, Sean, I don't know if you can bring up the topography. The topography of the property limits the locations that we can actually put the accessory building. As you can see, each of these lines designates a drop off or increase in elevation, and the highest, and the house is in higher elevation than those areas that are south of the house or below. And so you can see that the property drops off. And so to put an accessory building down back in the valley would be difficult, if not impossible to do. Or even if you could locate it there, it wouldn't be very functional in that putting vehicles or equipment down and up and down the hill would be a problem, if not a hardship. Third, even if you did locate it down in that area, there is the farmer that farms the field next door, which is also owned by the Gerkes. That is his only way to get in and out is he comes alongside, and he's got a very large combine and with big tractor tires. So one, I believe that it already does comply with the ordinance, but in the alternative, if you don't believe that it does comply with the ordinance, we believe that a modification is appropriate. And as far as the materials, I think the materials, if you'd like to see samples of the materials, we do have samples. Russ, do you want to bring up if you have a sample of the materials that will be used on the accessory building?
And why don't we stop for a second so we can bring those up? For the Plan Commission members, because this was an issue last time at the staff meeting, we recommended that they bring samples of the materials so you could see them. I know that's unique and we don't generally do it because they're coming back for the second time. Sure. We thought it would be best.
I'm good.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
And show it to, we have one other commissioner, sir, on that side, the gentleman in the black jacket. I know we're a little spread out tonight. And thank you for bringing that. That's helpful. Some communities require it all the time, council, as you know,
I agree.
and we generally don't, but because of the issue last time, I thought it would be helpful for the commission to see it.
Absolutely. And if there are any other concerns or questions, either I or my client's property owners will be happy to answer them.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor?
Yeah, I guess two or three things. First of all, thank you for bringing those material samples. Attorney Macy indicated we often don't ask for that, but we may do more of that in the future. That was very nicely done. It beats photographs and verbal representations. The other thing, I would, I guess, pose it as a question to you or to the property owner, but to get this thing off dead center, I don't personally have a problem with the setback distance and so forth. It's close. We're not going to resolve how close tonight, but I look at this as 1,728 square foot structure. Is that the footprint of it? I mean, our current town ordinance, you can build a house any place in the town with 1,200 square feet. So this is almost 1.5 times the size of a house you could build. I believe when you build a house in the town of Waukesha, we basically require a land surveyor to stake it out to make sure that you're not closer to the property line or not. Would you, and I guess before you even ask the question, remind you, this is 4 people of a 7-person plan commission tonight. I'm assuming we're going to act on this shortly, but then this needs to go before the town board later this evening as well. So it's a 2-step process. Just a question, at least for you to consider to get this off dead center. If approval were based upon simply say stake it out like you would with a house, have a registered land surveyor at a fairly nominal expense do it to simply demonstrate that it's not, that it is in compliance with the ordinance, wouldn't that get us off the dime? You don't have to answer that right in front. I'm just trying to find a way through this so it's clean with everybody. So you don't have to answer that, but I guess think about it. I think that'd be a way out of the mess.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and you're so close to being there, and it looks like the grades are. It would appear to me that you could, even if you were 10 or 12 or 15 feet away, that you could slide that back and then be in compliance. And I think that's an excellent suggestion that to have it staked out and so that we know exactly where we're at.
To slide it south is where the septic field is.
Right, I see
Otherwise,
that.
we could have put it south, but then we're too close to the septic field.
I think the rule is, and Supervisor Fisher, maybe you can help me. I think it's 25 feet away from a septic. So you have to have separation. I'm almost positive that's the number.
I don't recall off the top of my head.
I'm pretty sure. And if you look at, do you know, Chris?
Not off my head, no.
I'm 99% there. And it would look like, based on the drawing, it looks like you've got, 35 or ish feet there between, if the drawing is scaled. So you're feet away, I think, from being in compliance.
Well, let's take them one at a time if we would. If we could go down the line and see if anybody has any issue on the easy one to find that it's now compatible with the house.
Yes.
Okay. And then we need to find out how many are in favor of the waiver if needed, or that you wouldn't approve it with a waiver, and that they would have to stake it and show that it is in compliance. I mean, those are sort of the options. So let's have a discussion on it. If there's anything more, council, you want to say before that, but they could grant the waiver and then it's moot. And that's sort of where I'm getting.
I understand. I think it complies actually with the setback, but as I said, rather than if you're already okay with the waiver, we obviously would prefer the waiver.
It does not appear to comply to me. And again, very rough. We're on a piece of paper
I
without
understand.
good lines of where the boundaries are. It looks like you're feet off, but just feet, maybe it's 10. And I think Supervisor Fisher had an excellent suggestion, stake it. And if you can move it that few feet and be in compliance, that would be my preference.
So you're not of a mind to grant the waiver, and they should go and find out if they can cite it, taking into consideration the septic, their interpretation of the road. I mean, if it's legal, it's legal. So
Right.
Then we don't have an issue. You
Agreed.
want it to be legal.
Yes. And I think past practice of the board and plan commission has been that we have forced that issue. And that's why, past practice and policy.
I would recommend that you have a surveyor stake the grades and shoot it.
Let me ask you this. If you're not going to grant the waiver, don't they just have to convince the building inspector that it's legal? I mean, that's the way we normally do it. The building inspector makes a determination as to whether or not it's, and I'm going to use the non-technical words, in the front yard or not in the front yard. And if he's convinced without a survey, do you really need to stake it in a waiver? That's sort of where I'm going. If you don't grant the waiver, they have to put it in a legal location. they already believe it's an illegal location. They just have to convince the building inspector. The building inspector calls upon Sean or Chris or rarely me on that kind of issue. And if he's convinced or she's convinced, is that satisfactory? I mean, why would we place extra conditions on it if they can convince the board that the building inspector it's a legal location?
I'd be fine with that. Planner Malarkey?
That sounds good. So
Well, let's hear from Mr. Fisher.
Well, I guess I'll pose a question this way. How would they convince the building inspector of that when we spend 20 minutes here with people looking at things and say, I think it is, I think it isn't, I think it's close? I mean, how would they convince them? That's why people stake out a house or that type of thing. You have a registered land surveyor, you build it there, and then the building inspector is convinced. How would you convince the building inspector?
That's exactly how you would do it, by staking it out. So
But I
that's
don't know
the
if you want to
solution.
put that, we've never put that condition on before. We've either granted the waiver or not. If that's what the building inspector needs, that's what they need to do. But that condition hasn't come from the plan commission or the town board. That condition has come because the building inspector isn't convinced it's in a legal location. I mean, if you want to make it a condition, that's fine, but I'm just telling you that would be different than every other one that comes in with an accessory structure. We don't, the building inspector and the planner look at it and they're convinced that it is or it isn't. And if it isn't, they say they need a waiver. If it is, then you don't even hear about it. You just say it meets the locational requirements.
This doesn't do any, or doesn't put any hard expense for them because they're gonna have to have a survey and shoot the grades anyway and stake it. So it's a matter of feet of moving it after the fact. It's a small cost.
I think you're correct. I'm assuming you were planning on having it surveyed so that you knew exactly where your building was going to go.
We're going to have it staked out. Obviously, the builder is going to require that it be staked out, and we'd like to know that it's plumb and that it's square. But I agree, making it a condition, I mean, if it is either is in compliance or it isn't in compliance. And if you're going to put extra requirements on us that you wouldn't put on other people, I don't think that's fair to our clients.
I agree. And we want to treat everybody exactly the same way. So I would be fine leaving it up to the building inspector to make sure that it is in compliance. And the way that that's going to happen is through a surveyor staking the location.
Sure. Let me take another kick at it. I mean, most often when these are, and we're not, at least from my perspective, not singling you out in any respect, more often than not, and we do dozens of these accessory structures typically every year for residents in Waukesha, more often than not, they're on straight streets or straight roads. Mm-hmm. And basically pretty much as if it isn't in front of the house, okay and good to go. This is a little unique, and you brought into play the fact that it's curved and it's not straight, and that makes some sense to have a little bit different interpretation for that. And I think that's the reason to have it, right? I think you should simply have that staked. I mean, you don't want, even with that, I mean, you want to be in compliance. You don't want to be too close to that septic system or whatever. I mean, I think we're basically just asking you for a little bit of insurance on your part and reassurance for the town. So my position is still, I think you get somebody to stake it out and say it's good to go, and the building inspector ought to be satisfied with that, and on we go. So that's my point of view.
Are you saying that the building inspector is not qualified to determine whether it's located appropriately?
Not, I'm saying that based on what we've got here and that type of thing. If I'm the building inspector, no, I can't make that call, whether it complies with the ordinance or not.
Council, was your question, is the building inspector qualified to say it's in a proper location, a legal location, without a survey?
I'm asking whether this plan commission believes their own inspector is capable of determining whether or not he needs a survey and whether or not he needs more information in order to determine whether it complies with your ordinance.
I'll answer that question. For me, no. You need a survey. A survey needs to be completed. The building inspector has a specific skill set with regards to inspecting a building to make sure the electrical is in compliance and the plumbing is in compliance, or to encourage compliance rather.
So are you
But
requiring a
certainly-
survey for everybody that comes before you for an accessory building?
In this,
I'm going to suggest a motion, Mr. Chairman, to move this on because I think we could find a solution that's not going to be problematic. But do you have something first, Mr. Flynn?
I do. I guess I just want to add, first I want to apologize that this particular issue was brought forward at the late hour, but it is what it is, and I think it should be investigated. I'm the one that prepares the zoning permits. As if an accessory building were to come forward to the town and it didn't require plan commission and board approval, I would look at the setback. I confer with the building inspector as to whether it was located in the front yard. One of the conditions that we put on any zoning permit that gets approved, when there's any question at all about the location in terms of whether it's a foot off the setback or it's 2 feet off the setback, if it's anywhere near that close, there's always a condition put on the zoning permit that says the building inspector has the right to request a survey if it's a certain distance from a particular location. I think there's even a provision in the ordinance that gives us that right to request that. So it's not uncommon, if there's any question at all about where the location is, to require a survey before the building inspector issues the building permit.
I don't dispute that at all, but to require that we were required to do a survey, and that requirement comes from the plan commission versus the inspector. The inspector may very well look at it and say, you're absolutely right. I can see that it is in compliance. But I'm not sure that this is the proper forum to be requiring the survey.
Okay, I'm going to suggest a motion for the planning commission, and that is that they recommend to the town board that they approve the accessory structure request, that there's no granting of a waiver of the location into the front yard, that the building material are compatible, so those two issues are addressed, and that you recommend but not require that a survey, that the building be staked in order to be sure that the building is in the proper location.
so move. In a second? Any
Now,
further?
we can have discussion. I'm not saying that has to be your motion. It could get voted down, and you could say that it is going to be a requirement. But you are making the recommendation that you, in your mind, if I listen to what all of you said, you can't see a way that he could be convinced, he or she, without having the survey. But you're not telling him. You're telling him to do his job and make sure it's in the legal location.
Who are we making the recommendation to?
The petitioner.
There's a recommendation to grant it to the town board, and as
No,
part of
the
that,
recommendation for the survey.
to the building inspector and the planner.
I thought we would be making that to the petitioner. They're recommending that they get a survey.
No, you're making, my hearing of what you were saying is that you're making a strong suggestion to the building inspector. You don't see how he or she could do it without a survey, but do your job. You have to be convinced.
I guess I think it is a stakeout. It isn't a survey, it's simply stakeout, and I think it should be a requirement, and we're done.
Here is the problem that you could find yourself in. So the building inspector has forced buildings to be moved because they are not in compliance with the code. It is for your own safety. I mean, this is obviously not a cheap project, and it's going to be a very nice building. You've got great materials. Don't hurt yourself over spending a few $100s on staking this thing out and getting it in the right location so that you don't run into some problems. I mean, it could become a problem years down the road after the building's already up and you're trying to sell the house and it's not in compliance. I would strongly recommend that. I think it's just a great idea, especially with something as big as what you're building. It was a 10 by 10 garden shed from Menards. It's a whole different animal.
We hear what you're saying.
So
Well, I made the motion that it be a recommendation, and I'll change it to stakeout from survey. I use the proper phraseology, and it sounds like the motion is going to fail, and so then you can make another motion recommending it, or you can withdraw the motion and make it that it's a requirement. I just wanted to move it along for discussion purposes. Either one is fine with me. You guys make the policy decision.
Well, I make a motion, they stake it.
Well, we can't because
Let's
we've got a
withdraw
motion
that
on the table. We can withdraw it.
Well,
You want to withdraw your motion
okay, withdraw my motion.
and the second? All right. Do you have a motion to make?
I make a motion that they stake it out.
Okay, and a second.
Okay, it's a recommendation of the town board to approve the accessory structure. You're not granting a waiver to the location. They must stake the building out to be convinced that it's in the location, and the building materials are appropriate.
And subject to the rest of the conditions from the planner. And a second. Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
This will be before the town board later, as you know.
Stick around. Okay, on to B, site plan of operation for Kurt Berger from Bliffert Lumber. The location is S30 West 24604 Sunset Drive. Tax key is WAKT 1335988. This is for a recommendation to the town board. Planner Malarkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The petitioner is requesting approval of an amendment to the site plan of operation for the business, which is Bliffert Lumber on Sunset Drive. They want to update the facade of the building and the entrance on the main building that's adjacent to and facing Sunset Drive. The building footprint and site layout will remain the same, with the exception of the added two-story entrance vestibule. Materials will include cedar shake siding, fiber cement architectural panels, and a new metal roof. The petitioner has stated that the architectural update will match the model of the other Bliffert locations. My staff report also includes information on the sign request. I will save that until the board meeting later on. The last amendment to the site plan of operation was approved in 2012 for a storage building on the property. So in terms of the plan of operation, no changes to the plan of operation are being proposed. The site plan, no substantial changes are being proposed with the exception of the added entrance vestibule, which is about 75 square feet in area. This area for the new addition is currently occupied by the existing roof overhang walkway. So there's already an overhang that occupies the space. The entrance vestibule will be no closer to the road than the overhang. In terms of landscaping, section 13.2-4G6 requires landscaping for developed lots when the improvement to a building exceeds 25% of the value of the existing building. Per the petitioner, with the new roof, that value will be exceeded. Basically, what's required is 40 landscape points. Per this, they're proposing to plant 3 large pine trees to satisfy that requirement, which does meet the point totals. There is no place in the site for landscaping. It's pretty much all hardscape except to the far west of the site. There's a grass strip which they're proposing to put these pine trees there, but located far enough back so that it doesn't block the view of the adjacent business and signs, etc. So in terms of the architecture, I mentioned the materials. Our code requires that building facades for retail businesses, service, multifamily, and office uses for all building exteriors be brick, decorative masonry, glass panel, EFIS for only 50% of the exterior building face, or other appropriate finished material as may be approved by the Plan Commission and Board. The current facade material being proposed is primarily vertical wood siding. The Plan Commission should determine if that proposed cedar shake siding and cement panels are appropriate finished materials for the building. They're not listed in the code. In terms of exterior lighting, they're proposing 6 downward-facing lighting fixtures. They did a small sketch plan of the lighting. In terms of the specifications for the lighting fixtures, they basically diminish. The light sources diminish very quickly, and that they're less than a half-a-foot candle from about 30 to 35 feet from the source, which meets the requirements of the ordinance at the property lines. Again, I'm going to skip the section on signage in the staff report. In terms of zoning, the property is zoned B3. the existing building setbacks and everything else is consistent with B3 zoning. If the Plan Commission chooses to approve the request, I prepared 5 conditions as part of my staff report.
Thank you. Is the petitioner here this evening? Good evening. Questions for the planner or the petitioner?
You can step
Come on-
up, sir.
come on
Yeah,
up.
just come on up. Give your name and your business address, please.
My name is Bob Hamilton. I'm with Construction Management here in Waukesha. We will be doing the project here for Blifford Lumber.
Thank you. Supervisor Fisher?
Yeah, I guess I have a question. I don't know, Sean, whether you're able to project, but we've got the site plan with some red handwriting things on there. That's lighting and landscape plan.
Yeah, this is it.
I'm trying to figure out a little bit
What's being shown?
yes.
So what's being shown on this, here's the building in question. Here are the lighting fixtures. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fixtures. What these bubbles are intended to show is the projection of the lights. It's admittedly it's hand drawn, but I actually did the calculations based on the lighting specs in terms of the foot candles at distances. And what happens from each of these fixtures is that they diminish to less than a half a foot candle, far enough away from the property lines where it isn't an issue. What the 3 dots on the left-hand side of the site plan are the 3 pine trees that are proposed to be planted to meet the landscape requirements.
Okay. And I guess just a follow-up question then on the front of the building where those 3 Bs are that are light fixtures or what or not, are those are parking stalls in front of the building? Are those affected in any way by the proposed addition? Are those parking stalls all in front of the building?
They are in front of the building. As I mentioned before, the vestibule that's being proposed happens to be here. It extends no farther out than the existing roof overhang.
But my
So-
question is about the parking
And-
stalls. Is there any change to the number of parking stalls?
No, there isn't.
There is no change.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
My question is we're not in compliance with the amount of brick for the front facade of this building, is that correct?
Well, I don't know if it's not in compliance, but the way the code is written is basically says for at least 50% of facade, it's got to be these materials or similar materials as similar finished materials as approved by the Plan Commission and Board. The question to you is whether the cedar shake wood siding and the fiber cement board panels meet that definition of finished materials for the Plan Commission's interpretation. So I'm not saying it's not, it just needs to be interpreted that it is.
One last comment. I mean, based on the verbal description, I don't personally have any problem with the building materials. I do think going forward, you may get a pass tonight, but going forward, I think we ought to ask people to bring material samples, commended the earlier petitioners on what they did. Most communities require that type of thing. I don't think that's unreasonable. I'll support it, but that would just help answer a lot of questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Well, I make a motion we approve, but it's a lumber yard. They're displaying things they're selling in the lumber yard. I mean, I just don't quite understand why it's so difficult not to approve as they presented it.
And a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
And again, Mr. Chairman, you corrected me last time. I just want to make sure it's a recommendation of the town board, subject to the 5 conditions.
Yeah.
I got it this time. You got it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
And it will be on the town board agenda later. It is a recommendation.
C, site plan of operation. The petitioner is David Lehman. The business is the Buddha Haska Temple at South 46 West 23214 Lonsdale Road. Tax key is WAKT 1388996. This is for a recommendation to the town board, and Planner Malarkey, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The petitioner is proposing to construct an ordinance hall shrine for Buddhist ordination rituals or other ceremonies on the site. There is currently an existing temple on the site and existing residence as well. This would be a 3rd building on the site. At a previous meeting, The Plan Commission and Board reviewed this and determined that the additional building would be a principal structure and not an accessory structure, and thereby would not need to comply with the accessory structure height restrictions, so they could build this as tall as any other principal structure on the site. The building is 805 square feet in total area with a height of 30 feet 4 inches. The application states that the proposed ordinance hall shrine would be used less than 5 times per year, would have no employees, only volunteers, and 1 van associated with the use. The building would have no water or sanitation facilities as well. My comments are as follows. The building height is consistent with the P1 zoning district. The petitioner and the proposed building is also in compliance with setback and offset requirements. In terms of parking, town code requires 1 parking space for every 2 seats for auditoriums, churches, theaters, community centers, and other places of public assembly. The site plan shows 50 parking stalls, which would allow up to 100 temple or shrine attendees at any one time. The petitioner provided information that said the existing temple seats 100 people, and the proposed shrine could hold up to 20 people, and that the temple and the shrine will not be used at the same time, and the proposed shrine is limited to use by monks only. In actuality, the way that the ordinance is written, it talks about parking requirements, 1 per 2 seats for places of public assembly. The proposed shrine would not be a place for public assembly. It'd be used for monks and special ceremonies only, would not be open to the public. And in addition, there's actually no seating as part of that shrine. So in the past, it's my understanding that parking requirements for uses that are not explicitly defined in the ordinance are based on a rationale and reasonable consideration. In addition, this would not be used at the same time as a temple, so I don't believe that any additional parking stalls are required for the proposed shrine at this time. As I mentioned, the plan of operation would be used no more than 5 times a year, no employees, and 1 van associated with it. Maximum number of attendees for the actual temple would be 100 people based on the parking requirements. No significant changes to the site plan are proposed at this time, except with the exception of the building and the associated grading and the adjacent walkways with it. In terms of the architecture, here's a picture of one of the elevations. The materials would include stucco, wood columns, and asphalt shingles for finished materials. The building is designed to be complementary to the existing temple on the property. The building would require landscaping for the building foundation. As being an additional building, it also requires general landscaping and then street frontage landscaping as well. The proposed landscape plan as submitted by the petitioner exceeds the requirements for our landscape ordinance. With the landscaping that's proposed in the foundation and surrounding the temple and the existing evergreen trees that are along the road frontage as well. So that does exceed our requirements. In terms of lighting, some downcast lighting is proposed underneath the soffit of the temple, and then a couple of lights near the entrances. The wall lanterns are 60 watts. The proposed lighting is in compliance with section 13.2-4H of the Waukesha Town Code of Ordinances. There would be no impact at the property lines from the lighting. So if the Plan Commission should choose to approve the application, I have prepared a list of 8 conditions of approval.
Just a couple of questions, Planner. I almost said Rybarczyk, sorry.
Not Rybarczyk.
On our agenda, I've got a tax key number of WAKT 138-8996. On your review, you've got 138-8996-002. Can you clarify which one is the correct one just for our records?
The one on the application was missing the last 3 digits.
Okay, so
the staff report's correct.
Thank you. And just for clarification, you said that the downlighting would be 60 watts. Is that a 60 watt equivalent, perhaps an LED light that's maybe closer to 14 watts or something like that?
The lighting of 60 watts applies to the wall sconce lighting, not the downcast lighting.
Still, that's not a 60 watt LED, which would be like a 400 watt.
Right, that would be like a spotlight. No, it would not be.
So it's probably a 60 watt equivalent.
Correct.
Okay. just to clarify. And the petitioner is here this evening. Good evening. Come on up. Any questions for the petitioner and or the planner? Good evening.
Good evening. Dave Lehman, architect. Any questions you have that I can answer, I'm ready to do it.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment, and it would be directed towards Planner Malarkey. I think from my perspective, I think your evaluation of this with regard to the parking and everything is spot on. I don't have any problem with that at all. I think the architecture is obviously unique and fitting of its purpose. Landscaping and everything, I don't see any issues with this at all. I think we have properly assessed it. I, in fact, would then move to recommend approval to the town board, the site plan and plan of operation for the Buddha Haska Temple.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and it'll be on to the town board shortly. On to D, conditional use for the residential planned unit development. The petitioner is Jack Gaudian. Location is part of the southeast quarter section of 18 T6N R19E. The tax key numbers are WAKT 136 897 003 and WAKT 136 8994. This is for a recommendation to the town board. Planner Rybarczyk. It was 4 years.
I'm the new guy.
There were a number of conditions that were on at the public hearing that we were asked to consider, and perhaps you could run through those with us.
Correct. The application at the last meeting was tabled so that the staff had time to go back, and based on the public comments, based on the plan commission discussion, based on board discussion, draft additional conditions that met the concerns brought up at the meeting. We have done that and discussed that at a staff level. So I would just like to go through very briefly the additional conditions that were added to the staff report, and based on discussion. Those include the following, and I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail. If you have questions about those individual conditions, feel free to ask, but I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. So the first condition that was added was that a construction access and road protection agreement would be required from the petitioner. And basically this would ensure that all construction traffic is limited to Sun Valley Trail and Merrill Hills Parkway, and that town roads are maintained at a minimum to their condition prior to the start of construction, unless a cost-sharing agreement is established with the town to improve the roads as part of a future road program. The town engineer shall document and evaluate road conditions per the PACER system prior to and after construction is completed to determine the change in condition. A letter of credit as a financial guarantee as part of that would be required. Land stewardship plan for all common areas would be required. An easement to be recorded for the perpetual maintenance of the Sun Valley Trail cul-de-sac by the Legend of Merrill Hills Condo Association. Because they're placing landscaping out there, they would be required to maintain that. An easement for use of common areas 3 and 4 by the town for storage of snow. A restriction of parking on private roads to one side only to ensure adequate access for traffic and emergency vehicles. The fact that the petition, yes. Yeah, I'm not calling by number. Would you like me to do so? No, not a difficulty at all. So number 4, I've left. Number 5 is the parking restrictions. Number 6 is because there's a soft center being requested for the cul-de-sac on Sun Valley Trail, we're asking them to submit a petition to amend the language of the town ordinances that would allow that at the discretion of the town board. That is on the agenda later tonight for the board meeting. So that has been submitted. They need to install, number 7, install siren-activated gate sensors at both gate entrances to ensure unhindered and efficient emergency vehicle access. Number 8, any signage that's going to be approved as part of this would need to be approved per section 13.215 of the Waukesha Code ordinances as a separate process. Number 12, skipping down a couple, that they need to obtain approval from Waukesha County for the comprehensive plan amendment for the to low density residential. Number 13, that the restrictions be put on the condo plat to the satisfaction of Waukesha County to ensure the portion of the isolated natural resource area not used for septic system locations be undisturbed. Number 14, that they shall field delineate the natural resource area, which has actually already been done by Sewer PAC at the request of the town. Number 15, that they provide written documentation from the DNR showing concurrence of the field delineated wetlands. As far as I know, that has not yet been completed, but will remain a condition. Number 16, that the petitioner shall locate all structures according to the wetland setbacks as established currently in our ordinances as of November 29th, 2017, unless superseded by less restrictive requirements in the future or variance from the Town Board of Appeals is obtained later on. So they will comply with whatever it happens to be the regulation is for wetlands. Number 17, the petitioner shall design the stormwater management system so that the post-development peak stormwater discharge rate shall not exceed the calculated pre-development discharge rates for the 100-year, 24-hour storm event. So those are the additional conditions that were drafted since last time. There's a total, in total, there is a total of 23 conditions here as per the staff report. So I would be happy to answer any questions.
And the petitioner has agreed to these conditions?
I've spoken to Josh on the phone about the conditions, and yes, these are.
We just have one correction. You know,
Well,
Come on.
You got to come up to the podium. You got to
Please.
give your name.
Pardon me, I'm Jack Gaudian, I'm the developer. You note 2 gated entrances. We'll have one gated entrance and one with bollards. I mean, they're 2 different situations.
Good point. Since the Oak Knoll one has been changed to the emergency access only.
Thank you. Sure.
I apologize. I just wanted to make sure that we're only proposing one set of gates into the development. The others for emergency access only would have bollards. There would be no siren activated anything with the bollards. Those are up all the time, and those are breakaway bollards basically for when the fire trucks come through on Oak Knoll.
Thank you. Questions for the petitioner and or the planner?
Well, first, I think we're going to do the planner because the petitioner may have other things they want to add. So he just wanted to clarify. So do we have any questions by the Plan Commission members of the plan?
I've got just, I guess, a general question, maybe so we're all on the same page of this. I see this on the agenda noted as a conditional use for the residential planned unit development. And I guess I'm just trying to differentiate, will we be looking at site plans and that type of thing for a separate approval at some other point in time, or does this embody everything or what? I mean, it's noticed as a conditional use. I need some clarification on that.
So it's my understanding it's a conditional use because of the PUD, and it's also a condominium plat. So you're reviewing 2 things at once here. There are things that will come after this. So if it's approved upon these 23 conditions, what will come back for the board are things like the development agreement and the road construction agreement and everything that's basically detailed under number 4 all requires approval from the town board after the fact. So there are a number of things: the development agreement, letter of credit, construction access and road protection agreement, condo docs, declaration of covenants, land stewardship plan, which has been submitted already as a draft, and the easements would all be approved after the fact by the town board.
Let me try it, I guess, a little different way. What my recollection is, what we've historically done in the past on some of these things is we have done site plan approvals. Okay. And all I'm asking for some clarification, the way it's noticed, it refers to a conditional use. Does that include all of the site plan and drainage plans and everything, is that all encompassing? Because typically in the past, those have kind of been separate considerations. That's what I'm trying to get to.
I didn't assume they would be different things. I mean, as part of the conditional use process, according to the ordinances, the conditional use process requires all of those things as part of it. So they're all submittal portions. So conditional use requires a site plan, requires topo, requires grading plans if it's being impacted. So it's my understanding they're being reviewed together. Chris, do you have anything to add in terms of the engineering documents that would be reviewed separately?
No, we've already started a review, at least initially, of the first set of the construction drawings. And that is ongoing. I think Josh is working through county concerns as well as ours. So we're kind of doing that in the background. And that's just the construction drawings. That includes landscape plan, that includes grading, erosion control, stormwater management.
So will that come back to the plan commission at a future date, or is that just being done at a staff level? That's the essence of my question.
Staff level if it's not in this document. Or another code or ordinance requires it, but I think we would have caught it.
Well, one of the conditions as part of this is that let me find it here.
Are you looking for number 11?
No, not number 11.
Well, I want to talk about number 11.
Go ahead while I look.
While you look, I'll answer the question. This is a request on a preliminary condominium plat. Now, you're all familiar with a preliminary plat, where you come in with a preliminary plat for a subdivision, and you would get a conditional approval of that preliminary plat. We all know the law, and it's not dissimilar for a condominium plat, that as long as you come in substantial conformity with the preliminary plat and satisfy the conditions of the preliminary plat, you get your final plat approved. Okay? So that's the first thing you're doing. You're approving the preliminary, or if you do act on this, you're approving with conditions the preliminary condo plat. They're required by condition number 11 to come back with the final condominium plat. You can't add conditions. You just have to make sure that all the conditions have been satisfied, or you recondition the final plat upon satisfying those conditions. That depends when they bring it in. They got everything done. There are very few conditions on the final plat. If they don't have everything done, then the same conditions appear on the final condominium plat. Okay? Then a PUD, which is what they applied for, is a conditional use. It's a type of conditional use. Just like a horse stable or events, those are conditional uses. The planned unit development is a conditional use. So you're also being asked to make a recommendation, and we've just combined and placed the same conditions on. I don't think we contemplated bringing much back, but I'll toss it back to the planner and the engineer, that if it's not in here as a condition subsequent that has to be satisfied, that's not to say it doesn't have to be done per our ordinances, but it wouldn't come back to the plan commission and the board. Does that answer your question?
Well, maybe. Let's go back to number 11, though, and I think you raised a good point. When it says the petitioner shall obtain approval of the final condominium plat per section blah, 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 and I don't have that in front of me. Obtain approval from whom? Does that say that does come back to the town plan commission or the town board?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
The procedure for plat approval in the town of Waukesha is plan commission recommendation and approval of the preliminary and the final plat.
So that will come back
It will come
to
back.
the plan commission and the town board.
Correct.
Thank you.
But we can't add conditions at the front. Just
I
like
I understand.
As long as it's substantially compliant, it's good to go.
I understand that, but all I'm saying is the town plan commission and town board will be given the opportunity to at least to review that to see whether they believe all the conditions have been fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for the planner?
Did you find what you were looking for?
I was just also going to mention condition 2, which basically says, in terms of what you're actually approving, the conditional use approval is limited to development of a residential PUD and includes all the plans, documents, specifications, et cetera, presented tonight. So everything is all encompassing as part of that conditional use in terms of what's been presented. So it's all locked into the CUP.
I guess I have a concern, or I guess like a little bit more discussion. I appreciate we've taken a shot at number 4 there with construction access and road petition or road protection agreement. I mean, 2 parts to that. The restriction for the roads that shall be used, I think that is clear, the intent of that. I still have a bit of a concern about what that agreement may look like, and in fact, that agreement can be reached on what we're really saying in terms of evaluating the existing conditions and when it says after construction is completed. I think that's, at least from my perspective, is kind of vague. What does that mean? All of the roads within the development are done, all the houses are built. I think that's really vague, and I guess what I'm looking for is something that's got a little more meat on the bones at this point in time, so that those town doesn't get stuck with roads that get damaged during the process. That's going to cost town taxpayers a bucket of money to get them brought up. I'm uneasy about the fact that I guess reassure me that this has got enough specificity and meat on it that we're not going to be spending thousands of dollars with attorneys fighting or what or not after the fact when we get to a point we're trying to make an evaluation of this after construction is completed. I don't know what that means.
Well, I guess I'd first clarify that this is a condition that this is going to happen. So this is not the agreement. This is just saying that the agreement has to be reached, as you mentioned. So this will come back to the town board, and the town board will hammer out the agreement with the developer, whether this is part of the development agreement or it's a separate document altogether. So this was not overly precise because this isn't the actual agreement itself. It's just basically saying there's got to be some agreement reached here. If not, the development doesn't get done. So I don't know. We can certainly put more specific language in here to get at what you're saying, but whether or not it's in here doesn't matter because this is not the agreement.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Let me just follow up with a question then. I appreciate that. So we're getting another kick at that, and I guess I'll oppose this to Attorney Macy. Are we giving up any kind of leverage on this at all from the town's perspective, or do we get to kick the can however we want again at a later date?
I don't think you're giving up anything. I agree with the comments of the planner that the town board's going to have the final say as to what he just gave some guidance based on input at the public hearing and input from all of you, what he says at a minimum, and I think that's exactly, if my recollection is correct, I think somebody said at a minimum that agreement's got to deal with blank. And he tried to list those as reminders, not only to the developer as to what that has to be in there, but to me when I review it and to the town board when they look to approve it. So I don't think you're giving up anything because it can be interpreted both ways. Construction of all the homes, or construction of percentage of the homes, or construction of the public and private road, and stormwater improvements. And I think that needs to be hammered out. If you found out, if they came in and they said, we are going to require all of these homes to be built within 24 months. Well, then I'm going to recommend that construction is going to be completed after those 24 months and those homes are completed. If they say we have no condition on when these people have to build their homes and it may be 10 years or 20 years, we're going to have to find another, mechanism. Sure.
And I guess, and I want to bring that up for discussion. I've got a level of comfort of that. If we know what's coming back, and I mean, the petitioner is here listening to this. This is being recorded on YouTube. I mean, I don't want the town to be in a position. There might not be anybody who's sitting at this table on the town board 10 years from now. And I know you're going to sell the lots quickly, but we got 3 lots are done and we're saying, hey, we're not done with construction and we got broken up and beat up roads and we got to spend tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees. We can't afford to put the town in that kind of predicament. So I'm glad we had the discussion. I'm comfortable with that. I just maybe even a follow-up on that. And I'm not looking for a definitive answer to this, but just something to ponder. I know there's been expression of concerns from residents and so forth about safety issues and everything. I mean, if this proceeds, that's going to be a fact of life and reality. There's going to be construction traffic going through those roads. I guess just ask, do we have some opportunities to do some better posting and post speed limits on that, give assurance to people that we will make sure that that's well patrolled and that type of thing, so we don't have safety issues. I guess I look to the town chairman or others, are all those things still within our control downstream, that we can provide the things that address safety issues and so forth. I mean, it's a reality, traffic's going through there, but so it's done in a responsible and safe manner. Are we comfortable we still have opportunities to address that at a later date?
Well, sure, we can always post speed limit signs. We can, at our discretion, install stop signs or yield signs at appropriate intersections. We can always call on the sheriff's department to post extra patrols in certain areas, as we have done many, many times when residents call up with specific roads where speeders seem to be prevalent. So yes, all of those things can, and if need be, will be done.
Okay, thank you. I've got
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question here. I mean, our concern about damaging existing roads is a valid one, but how is this any different than any other subdivision that we've ever approved coming off of existing roads? The same requirements are there. What requirement we would have for somebody with a 50-lot subdivision or a 10-lot subdivision, it's still the same. If the roads are damaged outside of this, the developer, whoever the developer is responsible for it.
Agreed.
So I guess because it's a condominium project, it's in a sense not a high density condominium project, and it's no different than any other single family platted subdivision. It's physically no different.
Agreed.
So I guess our concern, if we approve other subdivisions, why can't we look at the language that we've had in all of these other subdivisions have been approved through the years?
I think from a very practical standpoint, only because there's much more scrutiny on this one, and that's why we'll probably draft a little bit different agreement. And I don't know that I've seen an agreement before that's been drafted regarding road maintenance after construction. And I see Engineer Gianelli shaking his head that he doesn't recall seeing one either. But nonetheless, it'll be done, and it'll be part of the condition of approval. Supervisor Fisher?
Yeah, well, just one other comment, if I might, and that's, I know there've been discussion and concerns about two things, but about water. One basically was stormwater management. Those are issues of water quality and water quantity. I am personally satisfied that there's been good engineering work done on this in terms of the plan development. I think there are lots of safeguards, and I think adequate safeguards in terms of the permitting and the inspection process of that are going to go on at Waukesha County and other places. We looked previously at the public hearing and so forth about drainage, and with few exceptions, most of that is contained within the development, and I think appropriately and responsibly so. So I think water quality and quantity issues with stormwater management, I think, have been well addressed. There have been expressions of concern about groundwater or drinking water, quantity on that, whether people's wells might be depleted, reasonable estimates of gallons per day of water consumption per dwelling unit or per individual. There was even, I think, some suggestion that the town ought to require, as part of the process, testing or monitoring of wells in the neighborhood. A reference was even made to the development or the area that has been previously proposed in the town, where the city was looking at introducing high capacity wells in the shallow aquifer. I think a number of people were aware of the fact that the town for 8 years has been monitoring about 25 wells in the southwestern part of the town. We're now pretty much on a routine procedure to twice annually monitor for static water levels. Those are presented at public meetings, and we did just within the past month or so. That was truly about very high capacity proposed wells in the shallow aquifer. I see this a bit differently, even though there are 30-some lots or dwelling units. This is not high capacity to the extent that was. I don't think the town should be involved in trying to further monitor or regulate that. But that said, I think town neighbors or residents who might be concerned about their private wells certainly would encourage you to monitor your own wells. I mean, the town basically, we do 25 wells and we're paying about, Kathy, what, $1,100 or something like that each round of activity, about $40 a piece. And the data is logged and kept. You can go and get a battery of tests for all the levels of nitrates and heavy metals and chlorides and everything, a water quality type of thing at a fairly reasonable price. I think we should make that information available to the town wants to follow up on it. And if that's a concern for people, either as individuals and groups, I would encourage you to do your own qualitative analysis and monitoring. I don't think the town should be involved in it at this point in time, because if we're going to do that, then every time somebody comes in to divide land or what or not, I think we'd have to follow that course. So I just want to put that out there. I think the encouragement needs to be, if that's a serious, legitimate concern, that you can do that at reasonable expense and you can do it privately.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I don't have any questions, I guess, but there's some of the things, and I agree with everything Brian said. The thing is very well laid out and takes care of all the water issues that I was concerned about in the beginning. The other issue that a lot of people have brought up is why they can't have their own private entrance to that. And I believe there was an issue with an ordinance for the cul-de-sacs to be continued on a development, correct? They have to use the cul-de-sac, the existing cul-de-sac to enter. And I just wanted, can we clarify that to make sure everybody understands why we have to do it that way?
When we have temporary cul-de-sacs, we are required and have required those temporary cul-de-sacs to be brought into the next portion of development, much like the land off of Glutner. It was just a 2-lot subdivision, and we forced that developer to bring in, to repair a temporary cul-de-sac and bring in a new cul-de-sac onto the property. It is past practice and policy, and perhaps even from a legal standpoint required. Would that be correct, Counselor?
We don't have a court case on it yet, but I'm very concerned when any community makes, well, we had several here where it was wetlands and it was a temporary cul-de-sac and we had no place to put the permanent cul-de-sac, but at least I have a reason why we couldn't fix that temporary cul-de-sac situation. But every instance where you have a temporary cul-de-sac, it's my recommendation because of legal concerns that it become a permanent cul-de-sac.
Thank you. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it wasn't a question. I'm just trying to clarify it so everybody, understands why we have to use that cul-de-sac and not the private entrance.
Supervisor Fisher?
Yeah, last quick question on the cul-de-sacs, and I appreciate that Planner Malarkey, and we've addressed that in your item 5. My understanding, if we do move to recommend approval as the plan commissioner, even if it comes to town board tonight or whatever, at this point in time, it would, and I understand you've got a recommendation there that's underlined and so forth, but the approval would be without soft centers, either in the public cul-de-sac or in the private cul-de-sacs, and it necessarily has to be so because they cannot have soft centers by ordinance until and unless that's addressed and changed. Am I correct on that? So our approval tonight is without soft centers.
No, the approval would be as is presented, with the caveat that they will obtain approval for the change in the ordinance to allow the soft centers.
Well,
Number 6, so it's the petitioner shall obtain approval of an amendment to section 6-2-1J of the town code to the effect that the soft centers and cul-de-sacs may be approved at the discretion of the town board. So if you approve it without the soft centers, then you're not approving the soft centers.
Brian,
Well,
we're addressing that this evening.
Let me answer it as I understood it. They've requested the soft centers. If they want to keep the soft centers, They have to get the town board to amend the code, and then they have to get the town board to grant a waiver pursuant to the amendment, because we're not making it a right, we're making it a privilege to ask for a waiver to allow for a soft center. So there would be a two-step process. If they don't make those two-step processes, they can't have the soft center. Would you agree with that interpretation?
Yes. So, but back to the original point that that was made was that he's asking if the approval is actually for the soft centers tonight as part of the Plan Commission's discussion and recommendation. And I'm saying, I contend that yes, you are approving it on the condition that the ordinance, that they receive approval through the ordinance language and then the waiver.
I guess I'm going to tell you, I'm not very comfortable with that because you're basically saying approve it. It's in violation at this point in time of the town ordinance. Approve it on the condition that the town ordinance is going to be changed.
Right.
I mean, I'm not.
Because it doesn't go into, that doesn't actually go into effect until the condo documents are
Okay, but
recorded.
then I guess I'll say then I say we are not approving it. I mean, with that kind of condition, I mean, you're basically saying we are approving something that is in violation of the town ordinance with the condition that it'll be okay if it's changed. I mean, that doesn't make much sense to
But this
me.
kind of thing happens all the time when rezonings go hand in hand with other things. And one, like a CSM is conditioned on the rezoning, or the rezoning is conditioned on the CSM. They don't always go hand in hand. There is precedent for such a thing to condition the approval on the later approval.
Well, just for what it's worth, I'm not comfortable with conditional approval on something that's in violation of the town ordinance. I mean, try to talk me away from that, but I'm not comfortable with that at all.
So just to clarify, Supervisor Fisher, if one of the conditions is the soft centers are approved, if the board chooses to change that and then waiver it, I guess I'm confused. How else would you propose that we get to that point? I mean, that's the only way to do it is through a condition. And if they don't meet that condition, then we don't approve it.
Can't they come back and ask for that after we change the ordinance? That's would be a whole lot cleaner from my point of view.
Okay.
I mean, if the fire chief gets behind that, and if we do it in that type of thing, I think it'd be a whole lot cleaner to approve it without, and assuming we can get through that, then come back and ask if they can put the soft centers in.
All right. We did, in fact, meet with the fire chief.
I'm not going into that part.
Okay, fair enough.
So what about the idea of approving the current preliminary condo plat and all the associated documents and the conditional use without the soft center at this time, knowing that if they get approval for it, they can come back and show it on the final plat because it won't be substantially different?
All we do is bring a recommendation. You guys have to make the policy decisions. We write, what you told us to write, but you certainly can change it.
I mean, I'd sleep a whole lot better tonight if we did that.
Okay, so your recommendation is?
No, his recommendation is this. You're going to make a motion at some point, and you're going to tweak his recommendation or not tweak his recommendation, just like we did the last time.
Understood, but the recommendation is that we approve it with hard centers, and the petitioner has the option to bring that back at some point in the future.
For one of your commissioners.
Yes.
Yeah. That could make that a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make that ditto. I make a recommendation that we approve the plat as it stands, and at some point in time, they can come back in and request
Are we
soft
ready to
center.
make a motion on the whole thing? I don't know if the developer, he may not or he may. We said when you were done asking the planner questions, we would see if, now we're almost ready to make a motion, so they may not want to say anything, but as a courtesy, you always see if they have anything they want to add.
Could we find out if there's more before we say yes?
No, I think, well, we'll give you, sure, if they make a motion and you have to say something, but they're of a mind to, it sounds like you're ready to make a motion.
I thought I just did.
Okay, but then I want to clarify the motion, and that's fine. The motion is to adopt to recommend to the town board on the preliminary condo plat and the PUDCU as set forth by the planner with one modification, that it be changed to say you're only approving the hard center cul-de-sacs unless at some time it's that, with the understanding they could come back if the ordinance is amended and request the waiver. But tonight, you're approving no soft center cul-de-sac.
Correct.
And the staff is directed to modify the approval in that fashion.
Correct.
We're not going to wordsmith it tonight, but we understand your intent. That's your motion.
That's my motion.
Is there a second?
Does the planner have anything further? Do we understand our direction?
I do. The only other correction was to the siren activated gate sensors only being at Sun Valley.
Good point. And that's included, Mr. the maker of the motion?
Yes.
And the second?
I'd just like to hear from the petitioner. I mean, I'm comfortable with everything else, but give them an opportunity to address anything we've discussed.
We're comfortable with the process that you've laid out, which means we come back later for the soft center discussion, approve with the revised condition on hard centers. We're comfortable that we can take those steps.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And lastly, 6, a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
And a second. All in favor? Aye.
No.
All in,
Have something.
no, ma'am. All in favor? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. We're going to take a 5-minute break before the board meeting commences.